He has been over the years a sort of very involved participant and sometimes critic in wildlife management circles. He has run for office before. He organizes an organization called the Maine Wolf Coalition, and now he is I think it's fair to say, a long shot, a serious candidate for government. There's one piece about Alex Hutton. He died in 2019 at the age of 40. He had struggled for years with anxiety and depression, and he was a really gifted photographer. This is what these people that are we owe this to a very wonderful writer, Jenny Boylan, who reached out a while back as a relative friend. She had a tragic life when her son succumbed to some mental health difficulties years ago. And she shared with me his photography. I wanted to share with you. Alex was somebody who lived in some ways a miraculous life. He saw so much of Maine and so much of the world, filled with travel and discovery, and seeing the world. He also had many struggles. He was on the opposite spectrum. He had mental health difficulties, and his family, since they've often had been hanging on to struggle, is the kind of thing where you just allow yourself to see in this stage. He's shot out of bed really well. We probably showed him photographs from him. He's just a really unique vision, and you realize what a depth of talent goes there, and what a treasure is go on. Yeah, let's end up with what's a regular feature in the magazine, your annual best places to live.
What's up, viewer? How's it going? I assume you're a Twitch viewer, yeah. Chatting about things is the topic. What things is the question. Got the news on in the background. Don't want to turn down. So if you want to chat along, we can talk about various things. I mean, I don't know how closely you've been following the Olympics, but the latest news there is, well, for America, the hockey team was unable to successfully get to the semifinals, quarterfinals. So no medal for the men's hockey team. And I don't know if you know, but basically there's a situation where no NHL players, at least for America, and I think for the world, went to the Olympics. So it was kind of a cool Olympic team in the sense that most of the players were college or semi-professional players, and would have been a cool story. But tonight, the women's hockey team fights against Canada for a potential gold medal. And I think because they're in the finals, they've already locked in, worst they can do is silver if they lose. And the backstory behind that is that last Olympics in Beijing, it was the same matchup, Canada versus US, and it came down to a shootout in which Canada bested the United States. So that's been pretty exciting to follow. And then the big drama in the figure skating world, Camilla, I don't know how to say her last name, to be Valacrucha or something. Just a lot of drama. Apparently she had a positive test with the heart medication, Trestadone or something, and her defense is that her grandfather takes this medication, and she feels like there's some potential that somehow she became contaminated with it through, sharing dishware or cups with her grandfather. I mean, it seems like a long shot, but I don't know. I mean, I don't know how sensitive the testing is. I mean, regardless, the Court of Arbitration, sided on her position to allow her to skate in the women's singles. So she skated yesterday morning, and it premiered on primetime closer to midnight last night. And she's in the pole position. I mean, she's the top skater for the women. So the thing I'm not quite sure on is if they're just letting her skate, for the sake of seeing where she ends up, and then there's going to be a more rigorous investigation as to whether she can formally receive her medal, because I know for the teams, they're not, they haven't formally awarded Russia the team skate gold. So I don't know if everything's pending a more thorough investigation. Regardless, it's tough. I mean, the girl's 15 years old. I mean, that's very young. And you have to imagine that if it is the case that she, took the heart medication in an effort to improve her competitive advantage, it's very likely that she was doing that, at the incursion or coercion of her handlers or her coaches. So regardless of anything, it's really kind of a terrible situation for such a young person to be put in such a competitive sport like figure skating. And in America, figure skating is more of a niche sport. I think Americans in general view the Olympics as sort of kind of a cool thing to watch. But my understanding is that in a lot of countries, particularly Russia and countries like Norway and a lot of the northern, especially for the Winter Olympics, the Olympics is like their big event. And figure skaters like Camilla and various alpine skiers, they hold the status of some of our top athletic celebrities like LeBron James or Tom Brady. So even though we don't in America, I think our attitude in general is that it's kind of just a interesting side sport to follow when it comes on. I think a lot of other countries, particularly Russia, China, and others, they view it as the premier of sporting. And so it's just with all that pressure placed on a 15-year-old, and if some of her coaches or handlers convinced her that taking a performance enhancing drug would give her some kind of advantage. I mean, what are you supposed to say when you're 15? I mean, you've got all this pressure of the country rooting for you. You've got coaches, demanding perfection and encouraging you to take every possible avenue towards advantage. And you can see how it's too much for a 15-year-old. I mean, but that's the latest news. And then obviously the drama is almost more heightened by the fact that Russia still is embroiled in this whole troop buildup of the Ukrainian border. Russia media outlets sending footage of troops retreating from the border and ostensibly suggesting that the West is being, in their words, hysterical, or the West is overplaying any kind of threat. And yet the Western media is saying that this idea that they're de-escalating on the border is not true, or that they don't have the evidence, and that it's more or less propaganda coming out of the Russian media. So nobody really knows, seems like, except for Putin, what exactly is going to happen. Obviously with the Olympics going on and the Russian figure skating, it seems to heighten the drama, because Russia could potentially, again, if you listen to the American outlets, they're warning any day it could happen at any time. Again, I want to emphasize that the Russian media is suggesting that these are just routine exercises and that there's no threat of invasion. But with that said, if you do some research, Putin has made clear through several forms of media and several statements that he does not believe that Ukraine should be a sovereign state. I mean, I was reading an essay that he wrote pretty recently, I think it was in 2019 or 2020, and he outlines the history as the whole idea that the ancient Rus people, Kiev was the cultural and political capital of the ancient Rus people, and he feels as though there is no cultural or ethnic difference between, people from Ukraine and people from Russia, and that they share the same background. And I think his argument is that, the post-Cold War border is more or less an artificial border that doesn't really reflect the cultural and historical background of the ancient Rus people. And again, I'm not much of a scholar of that. I don't know specifically. I mean, I can see from his perspective where he feels like, the idea of creating the nation of Ukraine is more just to have a buffer nation in between NATO and Russia so that, because obviously if Ukraine formally um, entered into a political agreement with Russia's, Putin's Russia, then all of a sudden there's no buffer, and you have, Poland and the Baltics right up against the Russian government. So, yeah, I can see how, politically for NATO, it probably is a little more reassuring if there's, Ukraine's a huge nation. I mean, I think it's at least the size of, Texas or so. So it's, hundreds, if not 1,000 plus miles across. So, obviously that's preferential in the sense that there's a sovereign nation that Russia would have to get through before they could really be in a position to, cause Poland or the Baltic, Lithuania and such problems. And I don't know. I mean, it's, I like most things in our country, it's so politicized. I mean, I think, what's interesting is that in Putin's Russia, it's more because Putin is more or less in line with kind of a right-wing autocratic style governance. You do find that it's somewhat politicized, where people on the right, Trump followers and listeners of Tucker Carlson, seems as though they're sympathetic to Russia's position, whereas people on the left are very vocal and opposed to, Putin as a political leader and Putin's action, which is interesting because, yeah, I mean, back when, you had Stalin and the successors of Stalin, it was the exact opposite, where people on the left would be, more sympathetic to the USSR, and people on the right were, you had like McCarthy era investigations into, communist sympathizers and such. My opinion is, what I usually say is, yeah, I'm not a huge fan of Putin. I mean, I think, as an American, we have sort of the precedent in this country that, as far as holding the top reins of power, in other words, the presidency, 8 years is the maximum term that you can be in the topmost position of power. So I'm conditioned to feel as though when I look at, Putin or President Xi, these leaders in China and Russia, those two leaders who have gone beyond the 8-year. But I also admit that the 8-year thing is pretty arbitrary. I mean, we more or less base it on the fact that George Washington stepped down, our first president stepped down after 8 years. I mean, and it's not as though, we've had, obviously, in the Depression era of this country and the Progressive era, FDR, I think he held on to power for 16 years and is still considered one of our best presidents. So, I don't necessarily think it's an inherently bad thing, absolutely, to, maintain the top position of power for longer than 8 years. But, there's just the culture in America and the West in general. Although, again, when you look at it, Angela Merkel, I think she held on to the chancellorship for, 12 to 15 years. I don't know what the exact number is on that, but it's obviously their actions. I mean, as far as Putin goes, I mean, he's been accused of assassinating adversaries. Both Putin and Xi are constantly under accusations of stifling the media and free press or any opposing press to their view to their positions. Whereas Angela Merkel, but to be fair, she also stifled certain views. I mean, I think most people in the West would agree those views should be stifled, but I don't know. I mean, the point is that, I mean, I'm personally, a figure like Putin. No, would I want to live in a country governed by Putin for 20 years? Probably not, in all honesty. I mean, I don't think I would be super favorable to such a situation like that. But I'm sure he obviously has some, a significant amount of support because he's remained in power. And whether that's a truly democratic, as far as do the majority of Russian people support him, I mean, I don't know. Obviously, if you listen to Western media, they seem to suggest that they're not a true democracy and that the majority of people don't support Putin. But I'm sure if you were to listen to the TASS or various Russian media outlets, they may have a different perspective on how much support Putin has. So anyway, that's a long-winded thing just to say that my personal opinion is that as far as it relates to Ukraine, I think it's a very difficult situation because I think it's kind of similar to like England and Scotland and Ireland and Great Britain, where I mean, ostensibly, for the most part, the Scotland Highlands, they have a very independent identity, and the Irish people have a very independent identity, and yet they kind of share, a general cultural association with each other through the British Isles. I think it's similar with Russia and Ukraine, where obviously there are some serious differences between the two cultures, but they share sort of a identity, and and as I said, I mean, I think Putin has made clear that his opinion is that the idea of Ukraine being a separate nation from Russia is political tool to protect the NATO alliance more than anything else. And I can, I don't know enough about it. I don't have any real connection to Russia or Ukraine. I mean, I live in a coastal town that has tourism, and we sometimes have seasonal workers come in from Eastern Europe, including the Baltics and Ukraine and Poland and Russia. So I've definitely, especially for being in a small town, have some exposure to people from those areas. But I can't, I wouldn't say that I've ever had a very political conversation with any of those people. And but what I would always say is, they're people just like anybody else, where they like to eat and socialize, and I mean, just as I mean, the one thing, the older I get in life, the more I realize that a lot of the artificial differences, I mean, and it's like, I don't take it to the extreme. There are differences between people. I mean, there's no doubt that, I mean, even in our country, different geographical, religious, cultural differences, economic differences. But there's also significant things about all of us that, are pretty common. I mean, as far as various psychological needs, and, whether that's friendship or family, or, the need for shelter and food, and, a general desire to improve your circumstances. I mean, it's like I said, I mean, I think, there are definitely individual differences and cultural differences, but there are also, a host of similarities between everybody. So that's, obviously the major news is all about the Russia situation in Ukraine. Including the figure skating. Other news of note, there's not a lot of other news of note. I think. I didn't really see anything on the nightly news. Obviously, all the major international news has to do with Russia. Other than that, I think, the Olympics is obviously in the news. I don't know. I know I'm definitely going to try to watch the U.S.-Canada women's hockey match. Pretty much what's on my agenda for tonight. Other than that, I don't think there's any other major stories. I don't even think Congress is in session. Maybe they are. I'm not sure. There are different people posting their salaries. Yeah, the streaming thing is, I don't know. It's kind of like, it seems like it's impossible to get a viewership. I don't know what it would take to, probably like a better camera. Like I said, I always seem to get one viewer without fail, and I don't know. I think it's a robo viewer most of the time, just like a bot. Occasionally, it's a real viewer. I mean, some people on these streaming things, like, they make tons of money. I mean, I think if you get up to, like, hundreds of thousands of viewers, you can make, like, solid, 6 figures annually, maybe even 7 figures. I wouldn't want to do that, though. I mean, I'd feel like that would tweak me out a little bit. Had that many people that were listening to me. I mean, I'm pretty content to, I mean, again, I just do it. I mean, what I tell people usually is, I have a illness of the mind, and, I mean, a lot of times I'll even talk to myself in, in like my car. Like, I'll go for like a long drive and just, talk kind of like what I just did about like Ukraine and stuff. So it's kind of just like the streaming thing is just to do it as, in a way that I can see myself. It's like talking in the mirror, more or less. I will say one thing. It's going to be a competition. I might watch Amazing Race tonight. I like Amazing Race. But yeah, the one viewer thing is it's kind of weird. I don't really understand why it's like, here's your one viewer. It's never on YouTube either. It's always on, excuse me, always on Twitch. I don't know. I mean, I would think, like, if, again, I don't watch many streamers. I want to try to write more. I think writing would be, more. I do read a lot of, like little short news stories or little blog posts. Watching a Twitch stream is more of like a, I think I'd have more success trying to write like a blog or like a Medium, various Medium posts. And I mean, I'm actually thinking of studying graduate rhetoric. I think it would be an interesting study. I mean, learning how to compose rhetorical arguments and persuasive essays. And, I mean, I think there's a market for it. I mean, if you can write good copy and, build up an audience that, is interested in your ideas and writing. And there's also like speech writing and, I mean, obviously marketing and political activity is the bulk of where, it's financially useful, but I think also like, it'd just be a nice skill. I mean, I have an undergraduate degree, but it's in business. I did have to write fairly significant amount, various research papers. Nothing at a graduate level. I don't know. I mean, the problem with going to graduate school is there's just so much debt. I already have like 30 grand in debt. But they do teach you in business school that, that's a sunk cost. Like, it shouldn't really affect my future decision too much. I mean, but it still weighs on my mind. Like, a graduate degree. I mean, unless I got like a stipend and an assistantship, you're looking at pretty much at least another 30 grand in debt. So that's not, but then I also look at it as the federal debt, or at least the student loan debt from the federal government. It's not really that scary because there's so many different repayment and forbearment. I mean, as long as you know how to do a little bit of paperwork, you're never going to have to pay too much of your income. Typically, the pay-as-you-earn program, they take $15,000 or so off the top line number of your gross income, and then, it's 10 to 15% of what's left over. So again, I mean, if you're only making $25,000, $30,000 a year, you're only gonna have to pay, $75 a month. I mean, $75 a month is still, if you're only making $25,000 a year, is still quite a bit of money. But I guess the point is like, for me, it's like it's no different. I mean, whether I have 34 or 70,000 in debt, it's still the same payment because of the income-based repayment. So it's like, and then the way the repayment program works, if you stay in the making payments for, I think it's 20 or 25 years, depending on what program you're in, there is a light at the end of the tunnel that eventually, after 20 to 25 years, it theoretically gets forgiven, but obviously when you read about it, it seems like it might be difficult to get that forgiveness from your loan provider. But I don't know. And then you hear politicians, Pelosi and Senator Elizabeth Warren, they're always talking about, we'll just give a blanket, forgiveness of anywhere from 10 to 50 grand. And I don't know. I mean, it's like, who knows what the hell they're going to do. So, yeah, anyway. Well, I appreciate, even if you are a robo viewer, I appreciate the computer checking in on me, but I think I'm going to tune out for now. Unless you're a real viewer and you want to say something about what you want to talk about. But seeing as you haven't made any move to, I mean, I guess also, I don't know how it works on Twitch, but I think you can be a non-registered viewer and then, you wouldn't have the opportunity to chat necessarily. So that could be the case. But then you wouldn't have the opportunity to follow me or do anything really. I don't know. I can't remember if on Twitch you have to create a profile just to watch things or whether you can potentially view things without watching them. But anyway,